I invite you to turn in your Bibles to the book of Philippians, chapter 1. Paul's missionary letter to his beloved friends in Philippi, chapter 1, starting today where we left off in the last message at verse 27. Philippians 1:27. I'm recording this video message for Mother's Day 2020, as sadly we are still not together in person for gathered worship on Sundays. But we did get to send out a surprise team of delivery guys to drop off a flower and a fridge magnet at the home of every mom in the church family that we could identify. Hope we didn't miss anybody. Let me know if we did. We have a couple left. The moms listening, I think, can probably identify with this. Have you ever sent somebody out the door on an errand, maybe a kid or a dad, and you stop them right as they're leaving and say, and don't forget, or you say, just one thing. Whatever you do, while you're gone, make sure you do this. Yesterday, Marilyn, who, although she is a mom herself, did so much of the coordinating of the delivery operation, Marilyn kept reminding the guys as they went out the door, whatever you do, make sure you ring the doorbell so they know the gift is there because they don't know you're coming. Marilyn said it again and again. Whatever you do, make sure you ring the doorbell so they know that the gift is there because they don't know that you're coming. Just one more thing. Just one thing. Well, that's the flavor of the opening words of our passage in Philippians today. The Apostle Paul begins this paragraph by saying, whatever happens. The Christian Standard Bible actually translates the word here, just one thing. Whatever you do, make sure you do this, no matter what. We're living in a day when priorities are so important. They're always important, but right now we feel it more than ever. Priorities need to be prioritized. What are your priorities? What things are you going to do no matter what? And what other things don't really matter much? But right here in the Bible, the Apostle Paul lays out some real priorities for you and me. And it should come as no surprise that these priorities are intimately connected to the good news of Jesus Christ. Because Paul believed, as we say around here, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And the main thing is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Remember, Paul is in a Roman prison and is potentially facing execution for preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. And strangely enough, that doesn't bother him. He's just glad that the gospel is going forward because he knows that he can't lose. We talked about that in the last message. Whether he lives or dies, Paul wins. If he keeps on living, he gets to share the gospel and be with the church. But if he dies, he gets to be with Christ, which is better by far. And he doesn't know which one is going to happen. So he begins verse 27 by saying, whatever happens, whether death or life, no matter what, here's what I want from you. Look at verse 27. Whatever happens, conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. That's point number 1 of 3 for this message. Whatever happens, we need to live in a manner worthy of the gospel. Live in a manner worthy of the gospel. Is that your top priority? Does it even make the list? Paul is bent on ensuring that his readers live lives that are consistent with the good news of Jesus Christ. Now notice that he does not say, you are worthy of the gospel of Christ. That's not how it works. We are not worthy of the grace that is bound up in the good news of Jesus' saving life, saving death, and saving resurrection. Paul says that we should conduct ourselves in a manner worthy of that message. If that message is true, and it is, then how should we now live? The Greek word for conduct yourselves in verse 27 is related to citizenship. It's polytheuste, which gives you a sense that the word polis or city is in there. We eventually get our English word politics from that same root. It's basically about how to live appropriately as a citizen. You and I are citizens of the city, the kingdom created by the gospel kingdom. And the question is, are we living like it? Are you and I living like citizens of the kingdom of heaven? Sounds like we're back to the Sermon on the Mount, doesn't it? Jesus is upside down, inside out, here but not yet here, gospel kingdom. Are we living out those kingdom values? That's a great question to ask during a public health crisis like the one we're living in right now. Maybe this afternoon you could sit down with the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 6 through 7 and remind yourselves of what the kingdom is like and how someone who has entered the kingdom should be conducting themselves. That's actually Matthew 5 through 7. And take an inventory. Is this how I'm living? If not, what needs to change? Moms, with kids in the home. This is part of your job, to show and tell your kids to conduct themselves in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. Sometimes we'll say to our kids as they're going out the door, don't forget that you're a Mitchell. Well, Paul is saying to the Philippians, whatever happens, don't forget that you're a citizen of Jesus' kingdom. Verse 27, then whether I come or see you or only hear about you in my absence, I will know that you stand firm in one spirit, contending as one man for the faith of the gospel. That's number 2. Whatever happens, we need to stand firm and stand together for the gospel. Stand firm and stand together for the gospel. Paul says, then whether I come and see you, if he's released from prison, or only hear about you in my absence, he's sending somebody, a guy named Epaphroditus, with this letter, and he expects him to return with a report. Whether he sees them or whether he only hears about them, then he will know whether or not they are doing what he is spelling out for them to do. 2 things about all that. First, he's kind of like a mom there too, isn't he? I'll know what you're doing. Whether I can see you or not, I'll find out. Mom's got eyes in the back of her head. Mom's got spies everywhere. And second, Paul really wishes that he could be with them, doesn't he? But he has to rely on social media and technology like pen and ink to connect with these believers. He doesn't even have Zoom or YouTube. But he believes that whether he sees them or not, they will prioritize this: standing firm and standing together for the gospel. Now, we'll see more about this, Lord willing, in the next message. But Paul is saying that they have to be unified. He says, in one spirit, as one man, in one accord. They have to work together to further the gospel. In other words, evangelism is a team sport. Evangelism is a team sport. We have to do this gospel thing together. I can hear the mom saying that one too. Stick together now. We have to do this gospel thing together. Now, I know that's hard to do when we're apart, but we're not apart in our hearts, and we're not apart in our giving, and we're not apart in our technology, and we're not apart in our homes. We're not apart when we're out on the job. We're not apart the rest of the 7 days of the week. We're not apart when we are apart, unless we're coming apart, unless we allow division and disunity to pull us apart. That's what Paul is worried about. That's what Paul is warning the Philippians about. Now, we're going to see more about that next week when we get to the end of the book. I think the Philippians were struggling to get along with each other. And Paul is saying to them, don't come apart. Stand together as a team, contending for the faith of the gospel. Look at verse 28. Without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. This is why they need to stand firm, because they have enemies, because they're facing opposition for their faith in Jesus. And they're not just facing potential internal struggles with one another, but external struggles with persecution. So Paul says, whatever happens with that, stand firm and don't be scared, without being frightened in any way by those who oppose you. I can hear the moms say this too. Don't be scared of those bullies. Our whole church focus in 2020 is bold evangelism. Do you remember that? Bold evangelism. We have said that again and again this year. We must grow in boldness to fearlessly proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's number 3. Whatever happens, we need to boldly and fearlessly proclaim the gospel. We can't allow others to terrorize us into silence. Now, we here in central Pennsylvania have a hard time feeling this one, as we have so much religious freedom. I mean, here I am on YouTube and Facebook proclaiming that Jesus saves and Jesus is Lord, and I have almost no fear of retribution. It's sad that I'm not very bold when I don't fear any persecution. But many of our brothers and sisters around the world do have legitimate fears of just that thing. Remember, Paul might be going to lose his life over this message. And in the face of that, he says, just one thing, don't be scared. Tell them about Jesus. And look what the result is. Verse 28. This is a sign to them that they will be destroyed, but that you will be saved, and that by God. The persecutors will be destroyed, but you will be saved, and that by God. I would not want to be in their shoes when the judgment comes. You know, often when we encounter opposition, we think that we must be doing something wrong. I'm sure the Philippians were tempted to think that if persecution started to come, maybe they were doing it wrong, and they needed to back off on sharing the gospel so much. But Paul says, no, you're doing it right. If you have the right gospel and you hit opposition, you know you're doing it right. Because that's how it works for him. Look at verse 29. For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ not only to believe on him, but also to suffer for him, since you're going through the same struggle you saw I had, and now hear that I still have. We're all in it together. It's happening to all of us. We're not doing it wrong. We're doing it right, because we know that God is sovereign. The most startling thing that Paul says in this whole paragraph is in verse 29 with that little word, granted. Did you catch that word? It sounds almost crazy when he says it. For it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ, not only to believe on him, that's a wonderful gift. Faith is a wonderful gift. But also, it has been granted to you on behalf of Christ to suffer for him. What? Our suffering for Jesus is a gift? We are not called at times. We're not just called at times to suffer, but gifted with suffering for the sake of Christ. That's what Paul is saying. Now, I'm sure that Paul is not a masochist. He's not saying that we need to enjoy our suffering. Woohoo! I love it when it hurts. No. This gospel message, though, is so great, it is worth suffering for. Our gospel is worth the pain that comes with sharing it. Friends, it's a privilege to suffer for the good news of Jesus Christ. It's a gift. And when that suffering comes, expect to be hurt for the gospel. When that suffering comes, it will not be an accident. It will not be random. Our God is sovereign over our suffering and has good plans for our suffering, so that we need not fear that we are doing it wrong or that they can stop us. I mean, what's the worst that they can do? Kill us? No problem. Then we would just be with Christ, which is better by far. Whatever happens, even death, we have nothing to be scared of. So we can boldly and fearlessly proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. Who are you going to tell?